Welcome to Metaphysical Soul Speak. I'm your host, Alanna Fox Starks. Hi guys. Well, I have more Schumann Resonance news today. I want to start with that because my other phone is dying. The battery is on red. So at 11:30 UTC time, it says, we are still above 40 Hertz. A spike in today's activity reached 60 Hertz at 7:20 UTC. We are seeing medium activity that continued since yesterday. We had just few hours of calm, but mainly the movements have been continuous. And then the evening report at 17 UTC, 1700, I guess that's 5 o'clock UTC time. Anyway, it says, the intense activity continues in the sequence of days that have seen a constant and gradual increase. In these last hours, there have been 3 strong peaks, 3 white pillars in the chart, which have all reached the same maximum at around 50 Hertz. We will see in the next hours if the activity will have a break. So that's it. That's pretty cool, right? So we're definitely raising up, raising our vibration as we let go of all the pain and sorrow and negativity, and even the little glimpses of our childhoods. Even if they're happy, it's like we're at a point now where we have to let go of everything. Have you been through a major loss in your life recently? In the past 5 to 10 years? Even in the past 3 years? That's a huge part of it. I know for me, I keep reliving bits and pieces and snippets of songs that I was in love with when I was 3 years old. And I had my mom play it on a record player over and over again. And times in which I went to Disneyland, or just the times I sat in my backyard watching my dad mow the lawn, or I had a memory of collecting all the box tops from Cheerios, for many, many boxes of Cheerios and different cereals. And my dad collected them all and sent them away. And we bought a rocket ship because the rocket had just gone to the moon. I had seen it. I saw the rocket go up when I was really little. And I saw, the footage of Neil Armstrong on the moon. So I was obsessed with that. I was like, oh, I want a rocket to go to the moon. And someday, maybe I'll go to the moon. That would be so cool. I imagined a world in which we regularly went to the moon when I was an adult. And I just keep having these bits and snippets, laying in my yard and looking at the street lined with palm trees, Haynes Street, next to Van Nuys High School in Van Nuys. And ironically, when I went to Guatemala, I met someone who went to that high school a couple years after I lived there. And then when I went to Lima, Peru, a couple years later, I met another person who was in that high school at the same exact time as the chief of police of Antigua, Guatemala, who's a friend of mine too. So, it's so strange. There's something magical about that one little block. Maybe not now. Maybe it's a horrible neighborhood. But I Googled it last night, and I just looked at the area. The house looks different. There's a hedge built up on the old fence, but the old fence is still there. The sidewalk is exactly the same. Saw the place where I skinned my knee when I ran to tell my mom I found a baby bird that had fallen out of the tree. And I saw the little fence that I'd go to visit Charlie, who was our landlord. He lived in the house behind us. And he was very, very, very old. And I could only ride my tricycle down to his fence and then his little gate, and then I had to come right back. And the memory of the crow knocking on my window, and I saw that window, but now that window's been replaced and there's siding, and things have changed, but you can never go home again. You can never go back, really. And but it's just a part of that letting go process. So do that if you can, look up your old houses. You could do it on Google. I mean, you get the street view and you've got some, actual pictures of what it looks like now. And you'll see what I mean. I mean, even like trees that you were absolutely in love with, madly in love with when you're a kid might have been cut down. Nothing is the same. My old lemon tree is still there. Underneath that lemon tree, I had a sandbox that I played in when I was very little, about 2 years old, and I remember that. And I remember a little kiddie pool my mom put out there on the hottest days of the summertime, and slip and slide in my front yard. I remember all of it. My childhood was like ideal for like about 4 years. I had a 4-year buffer zone between heaven and the crazy, hellish ups and downs of the rest of my life. And I remember thinking that I was in the most beautiful, wonderful life I ever could imagine. And I look back at that house and I cry because I remember the way the sun was, and I remember the way it felt on my skin and the way that it touched my eyes. How it hurt, but at the same time it felt so warm and inviting. And I was never allowed to stay in the sun too long because of my pale skin, because I'm a redhead. And I was so jealous of people that had dark skin because I imagined that they could go in the sun longer than me. And I remember the garage where I'd feed Kimmy every day, or I'd watch my dad feed our giant, white, fluffy cat. And his name was Kimmy. It was a Japanese name because my aunt had just gotten back from living in Japan. So I was inspired by her, my Aunt Lou. So I don't know. I mean, I think about it. And there was a song that always stuck in my mind. It was a song by Mary Martin that was on, it was a famous song that was on the radio at that time on some radio stations, not K-Earth 101, which is all rock and roll, and Wolfman Jack. I don't know if you guys remember him. God rest his soul. But I mean, I grew up listening to rock and roll, which is my favorite. But my mom had this little kids album, and Mary Martin sang a song, Que Sera Sera, which was in Spanish. I had no idea what language it was when I was a kid, but it haunted me. I had to hear that song again and again and again and again. And I would sit on that porch and I would cry because that song haunted me. The future's not ours to see. What will be, will be. And I was so mad because I knew I could see the future. I knew I could see into other, I wasn't seeing into other dimensions yet, but I could see things that other people couldn't see. And I could feel the way the lemon tree was so happy that I would spend time with it every day. And I could feel the crow's joy when I'd wake up and acknowledge that it was an intelligent being. So I had that. I had a connection that was so much deeper than the other people around me. They were unaware. They were not woken up yet. And I just remember just like, que sera, sera, in this language. She was like in English and then in Spanish, but I didn't know the other language, and that haunted me. Now I live in a world in which everyone speaks Spanish because I live in Ecuador. And I'm getting there. I'm not fluent yet, but I'm getting there. Anyway, so I don't know. Are you reliving the bits and pieces of your life that were happy? I mean, I bet they're only 4 or 5 minute snippets at a time. Am I right? It's like this past world that we just came through was really hard. So, honor yourself in keeping the joy and happiness from those memories. Remember your aunt's laughter or your grandmother's smile or the scent of your mother's perfume when she hugged you before she went out for the night. The special moments that piece together your life, First time you saw the ocean or the first time you put your feet in a river. Or whatever your experience is. It might be way different than mine. But take a while, take an hour in the next few days and sit and think about it. Just think about all the joys that you had, all the moments. It might just be like a quick little 5-second thing, like the moment that my dad finally got the rocket, got the Cheerio, sent him the rocket. Oh my God, from General Mills, we get this toy rocket, and my dad built it. I helped him build it. And he did most of it because he didn't want it to get ruined. It was like really expensive. It was like $10 or something, which, like 1970, that was a lot of money. And we put that rocket in the center of our front yard, which is very tiny. I mean, that front yard is probably the size of my bedroom right now. It was a very small yard. And he looked around, made sure it wasn't going to go into any tree, and he goes, okay, I'm going to light this rocket. And when I light this rocket, okay, sweetie, I want you to look into this. I want you to watch the rocket, but look directly into the sky. We have to see where it lands so we can go get it. And I'm like, but Daddy, it's going to go to the moon. And he's like, well, we'll see. But if it doesn't get to the moon, we're going to have to get it again and relaunch it. We're going to have to get it right. And I'm like, okay, all right, this sounds good. So he put the rocket, after assembling it for like 30 minutes, he put it in the dead center of the yard, and he took out a match, a wooden match, and he lit it. And it started like this bright, I think it might have had magnesium or something to really boost it into the sky. And I'm like, oh yes, my rocket is going to fly. It's going to the moon. And, he made me count, and we're like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom, lift off. And it took off straight up into the sky. And I swear to God, it never, ever, ever came back to Earth again. I know that rocket went to the damn moon. We looked all over. We looked straight up and just went into the sky and got so teeny tiny. And then it never, ever, ever came back. And it actually scared me. And then I cried because now I don't have a rocket. So I thought for sure it was going to land like across the street at the high school so I could go over there with my dad and get it. And my dad was shocked as hell. He was like, and he like yelled into the house. He's like, Myrna, I need you to come here for a minute. And she's like, what happened? Did you guys launch it? He goes, yeah. And she's like, where did it go? And he goes, I'm not really sure. And they kind of looked at me and I'm crying. He goes, I think it reached the moon. And he gave me so much hope. I'm like, oh, our rocket touched the moon and we touched the rocket. That means we're touching the moon. And oh my gosh. And it was just like this moment of like, I was so sad and devastated to like this sheer joy and wonder of the world around me. So this week is the week I've been remembering things like this. And how much I wanted to touch the moon and how much I wanted to watch God bowl when he was, when there's thunder and lightning. My dad said the thunder was God is bowling and with the angels. And when there's a lightning, that means God made a strike. So we're supposed to cheer with joy and say, yay, God, or woohoo, every single time. And that took away my fear of thunder and lightning. Well, until I was an adult and then got struck by lightning, but that's another story. Go back and review the Heyoka lightning shaman experience to hear how I got hit by lightning. But I don't know. I mean, are you guys feeling it? Are you kind of going through a similar nostalgia? I've heard from a few other light workers around the planet. They kind of said the same thing, that they're just revisiting and reliving their childhood, and some people had kind of glossed over it. Now they're realizing they had a really crappy childhood, or they had bits and pieces and good friends and good moments, but their parents were horrible, and they're able to go, yeah, ooh, they were really bad people, or they just didn't really have time for me, or People are like learning about their childhood through like a new lens. The rose-colored glasses are coming off and they're seeing clear for the first time. Is that you? Are you going through that too? And it's okay if you didn't have the best parents in the world. They loved you on some level or wanted you on some level, or you had a contract at least with them to work through some stuff. It's crazy. But anyway, in other news, I actually was abducted twice in the past 7 days, and I have 3 new scars. 2 of them are along my right arm on my blue vein in the middle of my forearm. They were not there one day, and then the very next day I had 2 scars, like they'd been there forever, and they were brand new scars. I don't know what that's about. I'm okay for the most part. I'm still sick, but that had nothing to do with that. And then on the back of my forearm, more towards my wrist, is another scar that I got after those 2 needle marks. It's very, very weird. I don't know what the ETs are doing with us. Sometimes I feel like that my twin flame is being abducted with me. I feel like sometimes we are like brought together on a ship and we're somehow able to interact, but we don't remember it. They wipe our memories. But it's like a feeling, a weird feeling I get. And then I think like maybe when we do meet in person, we're going to recognize each other energetically because we've already physically touched. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's just a very, very weird thought. Anyway, when I come back, I am going to relay a couple fun facts about Grandma Marion. It is Saturday after all. It's the Grandma Marion story night. I do have an amazing story from her life that isn't directly about her, but it's something that she witnessed as, I think, was she a child? No, she's a teenager. I think she was a teenager when she witnessed this story firsthand. And, well, you're going to be, you're going to be amazed when I tell you who took this idea and ran with it. So after these messages, you're going to find out. So stick around and I'll be right back. Hey you, have you ever thought about having your own podcast like me? Was it even a New Year's resolution? For me, it sure was. But as I've been looking into this for months, I was daunted. There's so many questions I had. When I was trying to get this off the ground, I was wondering, how do I record the episode? How do I get it across all the platforms? How do I get my podcast on Apple Podcasts when I don't even have an iPhone? How do I get it onto Spotify and all the other places? How do I get people to listen? And how do I make money from my podcast? How do I edit it? Oh my God, I had all these questions and I was so confused until I discovered the simple answer is Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free, and it is ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors too, so you can get paid to podcast. All you need to do is record it. You don't have to go out and look for people to advertise on your show. They help you. So basically what I like about podcasting is I don't have to have a video of myself. You don't know if my hair is dirty or if I'm still in my pajamas or even if I'm wearing makeup. Haha. And it's so easy. I could do this from the comfort of my own home in my living room using this amazing app right from my cell phone. So easy, right? So if you've always wanted to start your own podcast and make money, by the way, doing it, please go to anchor.fm/start. That is anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters that are already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast, and I can't wait to favorite you. Woohoo! Let's be broadcast podcast buddies. I'll see you there.
You're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
So Rod Serling was in the fifth dimension before we were. Not of sight, of sound, but of mind. Actually, the fourth dimension is where time is, and where our mental, it's like the mental plane, the astral plane. That's on the fourth dimension. And, well, told you about the Schumann Resonance today. We were in the fifth dimension for sure. We are in the fifth dimension. The third dimension is slowly breaking up, breaking away, still exists in the past. We could travel back in time to the past someday, soon. In 9 years, it'll be open to the public, time travel. According to some of the time travelers that have come back from the future, providing they're real. I mean, their lie detector tests come out positive that they're absolutely telling the truth. That they're not lying. Or maybe they come out negative. I don't know. I don't know how these things work. I'm not a detective. Just a light worker and a light warrior and a Heyoka lightning shaman. But, so Rod Serling was born and raised in New York, and he lived in the Philippines and fought the Japanese during the war when he was a young man, and came back to the States and married his wife. And in 1957, he moved to California. And the first episode of the Twilight Zone was on the air, I think, in 1959. And it was taken off the air, or maybe it was 57 to 60 something. Anyway, it was taken off the air, and then later it was on the air, and then it was, it was like one of those shows that was like canceled, and then a few years later they revitalized it. Up until even just a couple years ago, they revitalized it, and there was even a movie made in the 80s, and then, from that, Rod Serling also did Night Gallery. And then there was the rival show, The Outer Limits. There was a lot of shows exploring the supernatural and the paranormal in that time. And then there was TV shows that were just absolutely magical and wonderful. And they were my most favorites ever. My favorite, Martian, and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Nanny and the Professor, which is about telepathy and psychic power. Let's see. Oh, and then of course there's I Dream of Jeannie, which is about working with jinn and all that can go wrong, and how magic is real, but only jinn have it. And then you have the other one where Bewitched, that was the rival for I Dream of Jeannie, which came first, was actually Bewitched. And it's about a hereditary witch who's been alive for a very, very long time, possibly 1,000 years. And her parents are even older, and they're immortal hereditary witches. And she's trying to fit into a muggle world. So, I grew up, I cut my teeth on all these paranormal, supernatural, witch and magic and jinn, and, they talked to animals and animals talked back to them. And even Mr. Ed, when I was an adult, that came on reruns on Nick at Night. And I'm like, oh my God, this show is amazing. It's fabulous. This horse is literally talking to this guy, which obviously he wasn't. he had peanut butter on his teeth, and he'd move his lips, and then someone would voice over to the timing of the horse moving his lips. It was pretty clever. But the idea that the little boy could always read Lassie's mind, and Lassie was always communicating. And, I grew up with these ideas. The Sorcerer's Apprentice and, Disney, all these ideas. Magic and other dimensions. And, well, Grandma Marion was a hereditary witch. Go back and listen to the White Witch of West Virginia episode if you haven't heard it yet. She just came into it naturally. Her parents were Christian, but they encouraged her power, and they said this is a God-given gift, and you need to be humble and grateful and thank God every day for your gifts, but don't ever deny what God gave you. So thank God her parents did not try to squash it out of her. That magic that lies within each and every one of us, hereditary witch or no. So Reverend Marion Jones was a reverend, and in the 70s, I think, is when she had moved back to California. She was in California in the 50s, and then had moved back east to the South for a while to save money and have her kids. And later, her and George, her husband, went back to California, and they both, I think they both became reverends, and then they opened up a church. But I think it was like 1957, thereabouts, she met Rod Serling in a cafe. She just sees a young man. He looks pleasant enough, and she was curious, and she felt like a supernatural pull to him, like a emotional kind of connection, like a soul connection. He's soul tribe, soul family, So she went over and she introduced herself, and she said, "So, you're a writer. I see you writing in your book." He had a notebook or pages, he's writing furiously and smoking furiously. He was known for smoking 2 or 3 packs a day. And they were just in this little diner in LA. And he's like, yeah, I'm trying to come up with these stories I want to write. And so she, well, what kind of stories? What kind of stories are they? And he told her, and she's like, oh, I love this. I love these ideas. She's like, I have so many things that happened to me in my life. And I'm very spiritual. I've been, studying metaphysics and spirituality since I was a kid. And so he was like, oh, really? And they became fast friends, exchanged phone numbers. And, this is way before internet or anything like that. But so it's just landlines, but they kept in touch. And even when she moved back east, they were still in touch. And she never wanted any credit for any of these ideas. But my husband told me that she was actually a friend of his family's, but she and I had gone back to over 2,000 years ago. We've had many lifetimes together. She's one of my soul tribe soulmates. And so he told me this before we even got to her house one day on the way to her house. He's like, I never told you, but she did. She didn't do any writing for Rod Serling, but she gave him a lot of the ideas. And when he'd be stuck on a concept and he didn't know how to work it out or play out the story of it, he would call her. And she was like a secret consultant. She said, please don't ever give me credit for any of it. I don't need credit. I just love you. I love your show. I love your ideas. I just want to be there as a friend to kind of help you work out the details. So a lot of the stories that he commissioned Ray Bradbury to write, or all the other famous writers, science fiction and pulp science fiction writers of the day that wrote for him, a lot of times he'd say, here's a concept. Here's a core concept, and I want you to run with this. And a lot of times, 25% of the time, it was coming from conversations he had had with Grandma Marion. And I thought, oh, that's too weird. I love that show. I mean, I grew up watching the show, so I've always had a connection to her by watching the show. And that means that each and every one of you who's ever watched the early Twilight Zones, the ones that go on through the 80s, or maybe mid 70s, I think, the second or third revitalization, and even the night galleries. I mean, you all have a connection to Grandma Marion Jones, and you never even knew it. This is one of my very last episodes I'm going to do about the Grandma Marion Jones stories. I've been doing them every single Saturday, and I've already done like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've already done like 8 or 9, maybe 10. Maybe 10 I've already done. So I have a very weird one for next week, but it's kind of short. So I think I might just wrap it up, I'm thinking, next week. If not next week, in the next 2 weeks. And we will be done with the Grandma Marion stories. And I have no idea what I'm going to replace it with on Saturdays. I might just go back to whatever God tells me to do that day, programming. So it's pretty exciting, though. I mean, to know now, isn't it, that I kind of kept this from you guys. I wanted you to get to know Grandma Marion on her own terms, on the stories that she told me and things I experienced in her presence and things that other people told me about her. God bless her soul, man. She passed away when my youngest was, I think I was either still pregnant with him or he had just been born and then she died. I think he had been born already and then she died. But, yeah, so, but she did. She gave, I asked her when I got to her house, I said, so Grandma Marion, did you know Rod Serling? She goes, oh yeah, very well. We were very good friends. I met him in a cafe. I'm like, what? And she's like, oh yeah, when he was a very young man, he was a writer and he was just getting started, and we became fast friends and we just remained friends until he died. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And you know what, he was born on Christmas Day, Rod Serling, 1928. That's a fun fact about him that you probably did not know. And when he was about 8 years old, say 4 or 7 years old possibly, so 1934 is when the television had been invented and was revealed to the world, and was revealed to him on August 25th. So there's 25. Here's a number coincidence for you. Here's yet another one. My birthday is August 25th. I don't know what that has to do with you guys, but I was like, ooh, that's my birthday. In 1934, which 34 years later, I was born in 1968. So 34, 25, in case you guys are keeping track of the numbers and the coincidences. But, yeah, so, when he was a kid, he was introduced to the concept of TV, and he was just like so mesmerized by it that it just never left him. When he got out of the war, all he wanted to do was write for TV. And he wrote for radio first, and then later for TV. And thank God he did. I mean, his stories they just spark the imagination. But 25% of them came from Grandma Marion, at least not the stories themselves. He wrote them, or Ray Bradbury, or different people, but the ideas and the core concepts, some of the themes came directly from Grandma Marion. Remember the one about the lady who was in the barn and she was hitting the UFOs, the teeny tiny UFOs, and it was freaking her out, hitting them with a broom. She was living by herself. I think that one came from Grandma Marion. Because she was saying, people keep thinking that these UFOs are huge. And her idea was, what if they were really small? It would be so much easier to slip past us, wouldn't it? And it'd be so much easier for us to dismiss it as, oh, we just saw a bird. And what about, Grandma Marion took souls over to Bardo all the time. She was a psychic medium and a telepath. She could talk to people. But how could regular people talk to people that have died? What about the one where the old lady was sleeping in the middle of the night and she woke up and answered the phone and there was someone on the other end, they couldn't really talk and she couldn't quite make it out. That's how it is when you first start to be a psychic medium and you're telepathing. You can barely make out a voice. It's so high-pitched and chirpy and breathy and you can't really make it out. When you go and get the apps, you download the apps for EVPs, which there's a whole bunch of them for free. You could go download them tonight and start talking to ghosts. I don't always recommend that because, unless you protect yourself and know what you're doing, might really freak you out. I talked to Art Bell that way right after he died, and we had a wonderful conversation. And he and I talked 3 or 4 times. Every now and again, I'll fill him with me, and he has something to say, so I'll turn that on and hear his voice. And I find that pretty comforting, actually. But what do you do? I mean, when you don't have a cell phone, an EV player in the 50s and 60s. So Rod Serling invented that one where the telephone hotline to heaven, that idea. And there was another one where a little girl had a plastic phone and she would pick it up and talk to, I think, her mother who had died, or no, it was her grandmother who had died. And her grandma would talk to her, and her grandma would be like, "Put your mother on the phone," And this is before Bewitched. I mean, when this episode came out, and I think Grandma Marion also came up with the idea of a man who just wanted all the time in the world to read because that's how she was. That's how George, her husband, was. All the time in the world to read. That's all they wanted. But the way the world, this world is, of course, your glasses are going to get crushed. I think that it was like a joke that they were just kind of joking about how the world is so cruel. You finally get what you want and then you only have it for a few minutes and then it goes back to the ups and downs and the karmic nonsense. And but the hotlines to heaven, anything to do with heaven and haunting and the talking doll, haunted doll concept that was present in the Talkie Tina. My name's Talkie Tina and I love you. And then it progresses to this really mean guy that Talkie Tina's like, my name's Talkie Tina and I'm gonna kill you. Which that wasn't her idea, but just the idea of a doll that talks and a doll that moves, and that's really a creepy idea. She just gave the core concept, the idea to Rod Serling. So, and he ran with it 2 or 3 times. There were talking dolls or, in the phones, and especially the one where the little girl had lost her mother. The little girl and the little boy, they had lost their mother, or their mother had died. And I Sing the Body Electric. Ray Bradbury wrote that one. And I think that the idea, Grandma Marion given the idea to Rod Serling, and he said to Ray Bradbury, what about the idea of a grandma haunting a doll? And he fixed it a little bit different, made it a robot that was a grandma robot, and she would never die, and therefore the kids would always feel safe. And this is based on an idea that Grandma Marion gave to Rod Serling, and she told my husband this story, and he told me this one night, and it just stuck to me. And I mean, so much so that I've spent hundreds of hours on eBay looking up all the haunted dolls that are for sale because I wanted to read the stories. I didn't buy the dolls, but I wanted to read the stories. It's so fascinating to me. Like, I got this doll at an auction, or I got this doll at a garage sale, or I inherited this doll from my aunt, and the doll sometimes cries and its eyes are wet, or the doll will be in one position and I come home and its arms have been moved, or I put a secret camera in the room with the doll and it fell over or it moved. I mean, again and again, there's hundreds of stories like this on eBay. But nothing like what I'm about to tell you that Grandma Marion told to my late ex-husband, Terrell Starks. He told me this story. You might want to get a blanket to hide under. Well, Grandma Marion was a white witch in West Virginia. She was a hereditary witch, and she was born with these gifts, as I said in the beginning of this recording. And it was common, though, in those parts in West Virginia and throughout the South, actually. West Virginia wasn't really quite the South U.S., but might as well be for a lot of the folk magic and witchcraft and beliefs that happened through there. And in West Virginia, they're well known for the granny witches. You could look this up on the internet. There's a few stories. There's granny witches. They have the folk magic and the folk remedies, and they know how to help a woman who's in child labor, who can't get ready to give birth and they can't quite get to the hospital. They know how to make the potions, the herbal concoctions that are going to save people's lives or enhance their health or various things. They know what to mix to burn, to fix bad juju, bad energy in a place. They know a lot of things. How to see the future, divining. Grandma Marion knew how to ask God for people to get money, and they got it. Grandma Marion's prayers were answered because she had done her spiritual work. She was in alignment. So she was a clearer channel than most. But when she was, I would say, a teenager, she knew of a family, and they were just a normal family like anyone else. They had some folk magic secrets, especially the granny. Their granny was a granny witch. She had the recipes and the remedies and the herbal secrets. And she took care of everybody in their neck of the woods. All the people who were sick with fever, she knew what poultice to put on. If it was their liver, put the poultice on the liver, or if it was a fever, she knew what tea to make that would bring that fever right down. She had just the knowledge, the deep knowledge. She came from Irish hereditary witchcraft. She was of Irish descent. And she was getting very old herself, and she had gotten sick, and she foresaw her own death, so she didn't try to prevent it because she knew she was old and it was time. And she lived in a little log cabin in the middle of nowhere in the woods. And she just loved everybody, loved everyone in her community. People would travel far and wide to go ask her questions about all kinds of things. And if she could use her magic, or maybe make them a little mojo bag they could take back with them so they'd have good luck. Good luck in finding a wife, or finding a job, or getting pregnant because they wanted a baby and they were infertile. She knew all the tricks. And she loved her community and her family. And it was her family that she took care of. She was the matriarch of the family, and she cooked and cleaned and did everything for them. And she foresaw her own death. And so one day, when she was very old, she started to sew some clothes, and she started to construct a clay and straw doll. And she fashioned it to look like herself. And she made the little tiny hands out of clay, and she made the feet out of clay. The whole body was kind of stuffed with a little bit with clay, but mostly with straw. And she sewed a pretty little dress out of her own clothes, and she cut some of her own hair and made a little wig for the dolly. And she made a little scarf to put on the little dolly's head, and it was her favorite scarf. And her grandkids and her kids started to get awful concerned. Granny, what are you doing? You never made a doll like this before. Oh, no. She had made poppets before. Poppets for various reasons. Little tiny corn dollies, corn husk dollies, or straw dollies, or different things that people use for specific purpose, like for angelic protection or to do well on exams in school. Those kind of things. But nothing like this. And how big do you suppose this doll was? Was it a small doll, about a foot tall? Oh, no. This is what concerned her family the most. They knew she was sick, and she should have been laying in bed, but she was working her fingers to the bone, trying to get this doll ready on time. True story, guys. This is a true story. Grandma Marion knew her and watched this process. And what happened was she made a doll that was about 4.5 feet tall. And she made the face to look just like her own face. Her hands were about the same size as her hands. She made a doll for herself to inhabit after death, to help her family transition through her transition to the other life, in the other world. So it would give them like a buffer zone. I know this sounds crazy, guys. This is a true story. Grandma Marion never lied. She never had a reason to lie to me. She never had a reason to lie to Terrell. She told true. Every story, she was true blue. She told true. Every story she said was real, but I mean, you could see how her life has translated into 25% of the ideas behind the stories that were written and published on the Twilight Zone. So the time came. Grandma Marion was there. She went and she held the granny's hand and looked into her eyes, told her she loved her, and wished her luck on the other side, in the other realm. And the granny loved her so, and Grandma Marion was just a teenager then. Marion kissed her cheeks, told her she loved her, kissed her forehead, and smoothed her hair down. And she went and waited outside, and the kids were there, the grandkids and the kids were there, and Grandma Marion went home and left the family to it. A few days later, this granny witch, she passed away. She died. And that was the day that the doll came alive. Now, what I've told you so far, I'm sure you can guesstimate what happened next. A, the family would be freaked out. B, maybe the doll's head would move. Maybe you might hear a little whisper of something. But What I'm about to tell you goes beyond anything you've ever seen, real or fake, on YouTube, beyond anything you've ever heard about on eBay's descriptions of haunted dolls, or anything that you've ever probably heard in your life. I sing the body electric, the grandma spirit inhabiting a robot, or a robot acting like a grandma, is nothing compared to what I'm about to tell you. The idea was like playing telephone, you know. The idea went from what the person that did this act of witchcraft, folk magic. And then it went to Grandma Marion, and then Rod Serling, and then Ray Bradbury, right? So it's like a little bit like playing telephone, and Ray Bradbury took the concept and wrote I Sing the Body Electric. But the granny witch inhabited the spirit of the doll. And the doll immediately started crying, and tears came out of its eyes, and it got up and started moving around and walking around the house, the little log cabin, and it made food 3 meals a day, and it did the washing up of the laundry, and it did all the chores in the house, the whole time crying and crying and crying. It was literally Granny Witch's spirit that inhabited the doll, and it was in her voice. The crying and the tears were hers. It had enough sympathetic magic in it from her hair. It's kind of suspected that she used maybe her blood mixed in with the clay, probably her spit, maybe her sweat. She used her clothes, her favorite dress she had cut up, and her favorite kerchief to cover her hair. She made it in a way that would be like a mini me, a mini her, a mini Granny Witch. And she did it out of love and compassion and concern, deep, deep loving concern for her family. She wanted it to be kind of a proof of her magic, but not just that. She wanted it to be a smoother transition. Grandma died, but you know what? Grandma didn't die. Her spirit lives on in this doll. Eventually, her spirit will leave this doll, but it was like a final act of love that she did for her family. Grandma Marion went over and saw the doll walking, crying, talking. She would say people's names. The doll would say people's names. Didn't have any electronic parts in it. Didn't have a string in the back that you pulled. Oh, no, no, no. The voice was the voice of Granny, the granny. And she talked through her own flesh that she created out of mud. She had knowledge that the rest of us don't have. Some hereditary witches never were interrupted in their familial line, in their ancestor line. Some hereditary witches have that deep-seated magic. So it didn't last long. I mean, she had to make her transition. Eventually, she had to cross over to Bardo, but she did get to hold Marion's hand one last time. And it always stayed with Marion. She could not believe what she was seeing. She could not believe what had happened. This is real. I mean, from a very young age, Marion always knew that there was more to this world, more to this universe, more to this multiverse that we find ourselves in than what we see with our third dimensional eyes and hear with our third dimensional ears. And she always took it seriously in the Bible that those with eyes to see and those with ears to hear will know more. And from a young age, Grandma Marion heard the voice of Yeshua. And he walked with her in the form of Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching. Because guess what? Jesus wasn't the only time he was incarnate on the planet. He worked very hard to be where he was. Took him many, 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 many lifetimes to become born as a perfected spiritual master from the minute he was conceived. Greatest avatar that walked the planet. And that's what Grandma Marion told me directly about him. But she had told Terrell this story about the granny who walked around, and I mean, she put the kettle on the fire, she lit the fire, she lit the wood stove, she did the washing. This little clay doll did everything for the family, made beds, put blankets on top of people who laid on the couch to sleep, and the family just sat around really freaked out and crying their hearts out. And they just, when Marion was there, she wasn't Grandma Marion yet, she became Grandma Marion after my oldest was born. She told me, "You call me Grandma Marion now," because I'm her grandma and I'll be her grandma forever. And your little one too, but she never met my little one. My youngest one, he's little, he's almost 17, but Grandma Marion said that the family was begging her. They were like, "Grandma, we know you've passed away. We knew you were going to be gone. Grandma, please, finally take your rest. Please, you're freaking us out. We love you. We know you're in this doll. We know you're doing all this work of charity and love for us through the doll. But Grandma, for God's sake, please cross over to heaven. You're freaking us out, and we're worried about your soul. You need to go see God and Jesus and rest with the angels. You've had a long, beautiful, glorious life. For God's sake, please go. We're gonna be okay. Don't worry about us, Granny." And they were so weird. They're like, her soul was so filled with love for them, and she was so worried that she had prepared a doll to live at least a month, as long as the doll would be kept intact. Her soul could inhabit it. That was her plan, to go on in the form of this giant doll and take care of the family. But they convinced her, and after 4 days, she left the doll, and they had a second funeral. They had already buried Granny's body, but they actually had to bury the doll because they really felt like her consciousness had everything had been transferred to the doll. So they buried the doll, and they gave it a nice resting place in front of the little log cabin where the Granny Witch still lies today. Both her physical body, but also her doll. Now, I don't know if her physical body is near the cabin or if it's in his local cemetery. I didn't get that information from Grandma Marion, but that little dolly's buried out in front of her little log cabin. And I'd venture a guess to say that they actually put a little homemade sort of marker for the grave of the doll. So here's another example. Of Grandma Marion's amazing stories. Next week, I just have 2 or 3 things maybe to say. I'm going to ask her and connect with her spirit, see if she wants to tell me any more. But that's a story that I heard while she was still alive, and she had told my husband, and he told me, my ex-husband. who passed away also. So God rest all their souls. I love them all, and I love all of you guys. If ever you wish to write to me, you may go to anchor.fm/metaphysical. You can actually send me a voicemail. I could play it on the air or say the words private during the voicemail, and I will not. I could relay it to the world if you wish. Or you can write to me at metaphysicalsoulspeak@gmail.com. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love you guys so much. Thank you for being my listener. Thank you for bearing with me through the scarier stories, the creepier, weird stories, and some of the shadow work we've been doing lately. I'm glad to have you along for the ride. As Art Bell used to say, "Wanna take a ride?" Whew, this one was a ride, wasn't it? I feel like probably Art Bell, he's here listening to this story, and he's like, I don't even have my body anymore, and I'm getting the goosebumps. Yeah, this one will cause chicken skin in a lot of people. I am aware of that. It's one of my most favorite cherished stories, though. And how it ties to Rod Serling is just so priceless and precious. After all these years, to hear this. So that's all I got to say about that. I got to get this episode out before the witching hour in California, which is, well, midnight to 3 a.m. If you're a witch, you already know this. But it's almost 2 o'clock here, Ecuadorian time, which means it's almost midnight in California. I've had to adjust my hours since the whole daylight savings time. But I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will be back tomorrow with all unique content, as I do every day. As long as there is a breath in this body, I will be here to give you a show every day. So now I'm signing off with peace and love and joy and magic and the high vibes of the holy fifth dimension. Until next time. Metaphysical Soul Speak is run on sponsors and listener support. This means listeners like you. If you are so inclined to support my efforts and my little podcast, please visit me at anchor.fm/metaphysical and pledge an amount of your choosing today. Thank you.